You go. Welcome back to Archaeology After Dark, everyone. It is a new year and therefore a new episode. Welcome to 2024. My first guest is Natasa Sarkic. Natasha, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm my basic studies in archaeology, so this was my grad studies. I finished it in Belgrade. After that, I moved to Madrid, to Spain. It was and there I finished my master and my PhD. And after some times of working in different projects, I started my own company. Previously, it was I was working with my supervisor at that moment. We started like having online courses and also field schools. And after since like 2.5 years, I started my oon company. So that's on one hand, and on the other hand, I'm collaborating in a lot of projects in different countries. And my specialization is in human skeletal remains.
So that's what we're going to talk about today. People go back and forth on whether, studying human remains is, I guess, I don't want to say appropriate or should they display it or things like that. So, since you specialize in that, where do you land on that argument?
Yeah, that's like slippery terrain, because it's so much polemics in the recent years, and I think it's human skeletal remains or mummified remains are the only part of archaeology that is provoking so much reactions, like both positive and negative, because nobody has a problem with displaying, I don't know, like other type of any kind of objects, but when it comes to human remains, yeah, it's a kind of tricky. Well, it's definitely going. I think like the general tendency is that there will be like probably at the end like total canceling of any kind of display. But I can say that I disagree because I think it's depending on if you put it in correct context, it can be really really good and educational. So one of the things, for example, I would just take this as something that I'm familiar with. There was there were on a display in Museum of Anthropological Museum in Madrid. They were on display like some what they consider curious human remains, no? And like there was a this there was on the display the body of a giant. The guy who was at like to consider he's the second tallest Spaniard in a history, and he was 230. So he gave the permission for this his body to be displayed. However, now it's been removed. There was also some bodies of what they in that moment consider like people from native tribes, but I think that this kind of so it's all I think is that everything is removed, but for at least the body of Augustine is definitely removed, the so-called giant, no. But the thing is, for the same reason, I think why we need to have places like Auschwitz and similar concentration camps is the reason that we should not forget this part of history. So I think that's the same in a way for this display of human remains, because if we remove it, we will forget this part of colonial past that was also not only taking the gold and taking I don't know like values, but also taking humans and displaying humans alive and dead in the same time. So I think if these kind of things are put in a good context, this can be actually a good reminder of what happened in the past.
Yeah, and it helps to have a tangible example when you're talking about these things in history because if you have the tangible example, it's harder for people to say it didn't happen or just out of sight, out of mind, the entire concept.
Exactly, exactly. It's like we tend to forget whatever it's not too fitting to what we consider now, like having European coming from Europe, like we're talking about European values and things like that. But we had alive people in zoos until 56 or something. So these kind of things, you know, like if you don't have constant reminders, then you tend to think that no, like our culture was always great or things like that. And also, it's also, I always think like if it's with a good context, if it's with good explanation, and if you have some really scientific context, I don't have anything against that. I think it's actually uh, quite educational, quite good, you know, like now we tend also to remove like any and to close like all these pathological collections. But for archaeologists, it's going to be, or bioarchaeologists, it's going to be really hard if we lose this, because many diseases that exist now, they don't that existed in the past, they don't exist nowadays. So we don't have a chance to see that. Also, like all this kind of like deformity and malformation. Nowadays, you don't see that. They're just disappearing from because we have the 3D, 4D scans. We can see like what is going to happen. So most of these pregnancy are will not simply not be carried. So it's also like necessary for us to see like these kind of things in order to learn more about it. But of course, what we have to avoid is the things that we're using it in a way for just like for like being kind of cool, or being just as a decoration, things like that. That's of course like it's not appropriate way to have like, okay, having a skull on a shell maybe looks cool, but it's as long it's not really it's not really, in from my point of view, that's not really the kind of thing that you should approve. But if you have it in a good context in a museum, I think it's quite kind of useful, really.
So you said you specialize in mortuary studies, correct? What does that actually include as far as archaeology goes?
Well, in my opinion, this is connection between archaeology and bioarchaeology. And I really think that this kind of link is necessary, because most of the time you would have archaeologists that is digging on the field, and then if you're a bioarchaeology, you just get remains in a lab. So you don't really see in many cases you don't really see how the same the burial, no, and you will get just the photo, sometimes not even that, like or a sketch or something like that. But I think that you really need someone who can interpret really well the situation in a grave, and relation with the objects, with another individuals, and to make the distinction between what is taphonomy, so just that simply like due to the way how the body was decomposed. Some things can look on one day or another, let's say like you open the grave and you think it's decapitation, but sometimes the skull can just roll away, or maybe there was some sort of headdress that kept mandible and skull together, and they seems to be like decapitated and move away. So all this kind of or like you might find some animal bones, but you have to know like, is it part of the burial goods or not? So these kind of interpretations are really important, because this is, if we don't have this, we are losing a lot of information, because the way how the person is buried is actually telling us what was he or she what he presented or she presented in that community, what was the relation to them, what was the religious belief of that community. So these kind of interpretations are really, really important, and this is always this puzzle that we need, like, because if you just get remains, many times you don't understand. Let's say another example, you get remains of a female and a fetus. And if you're not in a field, an archaeologist, many times they don't even see these fetus bones, or they don't recognize it. They think it's I don't know, a rat or bird or something. So if you don't see like what was exact position, are they related? Is it a pregnant woman, or was it or maybe it was they were buried in a completely different moment, you know? So this kind of information you really, and what was the position? What was she buried in some different position because of her pregnancy and things like that? You know, this is something. And of course, like David burials, this is something that is really important and interesting. Like if somebody with certain disease has some different way of being buried due to that. So all of this is what we're actually getting a lot of information.
So, like, say, a yellow fever cemetery that we have some here in the United States, they would bury those people differently because they had an infectious disease. They didn't want people handling their remains and possibly contracting it also.
Yeah, these kind of things. But if you have, you know, historical no context, so it's easier to interpret. But what, let's say, like you have completely normal burial, and then you have one person like face down. So you want to know what happened, and you're trying to interpret why this one, or like outside of the cemetery, or in some, you know, like some weird position, or with some weird objects. Then you're trying to figure out like what happened there, why this person is different. Is it something that he or she was born with? Is it something like disease that was contracted? Is it some sort of, you know, like the belief about them? Are they coming from outside? So this is also very important, because you, if somebody's not, you know, like the way how people are buried is something, one of the deepest way of our identity, you know, like that's I always say as an example, you know, you have people spending, I don't know, immigrants that spend like 30, 40 years in one place, but they want to be buried in their own country, in their own rights, you know, because it's super important for us. You will live in the same flat as everybody else. You will go to the same work. I don't know, maybe you will say hello to people in a way that that culture requires, like if it's hugging and kissing or shaking hands, you will do everything of this, but when it comes to burial, you want to be buried in a way that you consider your culture, you know, like, so that's really deep, deep part of identity. Like, and that's why when you see something different, you know that it's that person was somehow really like outstanding for some reason, like, or very marginalized or really important. And that's also like really, that is telling us a lot.
Yeah, that's something I've always found really fascinating, especially in regards to burials. It shows how the individual related to history, but how history related to the individual as well.
Exactly. It's like this two ways, no, of relation, like what's the position of it, so of that person. So it's something that is a really, in my opinion, it's super important. It's really interesting. And this is this connection, because if you're not there on the field, if you don't see it, many times it's really hard to interpret. You don't just, you see remains and you're like, okay, what happened here? It's like once I got just the hand, and there was all pieces, you know how it's hard that you get everything, and it was cutted, but they didn't take any photo because the archaeologists thought it there by just by chance, like fall from some parts. And I was like, you cannot have it anatomical hands, like in a perfect position without being cutted, because those small bones are easily to get removed, so these kind of things, like you want to know what happened and you need good context, but like it's often happened too often that it's just like you don't have enough information. So that's why I like to be there. I would like to be on dig and to start, like from the scratch to cover everything.
Yeah, that's one thing that when you're coming in like halfway through a project, you don't want to point out other people's mistakes, but you also have to live with them.
Yeah, but it's not like I don't. It's not like I'm blaming anyone. No, on the contrary. But also, if I would lead archaeological excavation, I would probably be super focused on the bones, and I would probably miss so many things. So that's why it's really the good team is a team where you have like botanist and archaeologist and physical anthropologist or bioarchaeologist, like you need a lot of people, because each one of us is specialized in something, and normally will pay attention on that. Like I just recently start collecting, for example, parasites, because I thought it's something super complicated procedure, and now I'm like, wow, this is the best thing ever. Like we can know like the diet and the diseases and so on. So, but until somebody's really point you that this is something useful, you're just skipping it, like or you think it's too complicated and so on. So it's not about blaming anyone, but just on contrary, trying to point why it's really important that each one of us has. That's why our science is so wide and has so much, so different specialization, because like we managed to develop it in some incredible ways, but nobody can be expert in everything. So
Yeah, that's true. And that's also the fun of having a balanced team is you get to work with other people and they show you how they look at things and you show them how you look at things.
exactly, and that's something I really like to learn from my colleagues, and like, okay, how can I do it better? What can I like use to for you to get more information? And it's something that it's really like it's important to have this like constant teamwork, and also like having like the most possible, like the having from the old side, and trying to make it as multidisciplinary as possible.
So you said you started collecting parasites, is that right?
Yeah, I started from the last year. It's not me who is interpreting, but I since the colleague explained me how can I get them easily, because before the only way I knew about is that you have to keep them frozen, and it's like, okay, but we're in the field. Where I get electricity? Where I get the fridge? Like it's really, it was seemed to me something very complicated, and I assumed that most of the team would not be really happy to have samples in the same fridge that they have their food. Like, oh, we just keep these parasites here. It's okay. And then, so that's was is the moment I discovered that you can actually just dry them and still have the good preservation. Just like, okay, then I can do that. It's not very complicated. It takes just some days to dry, and you can still get a lot of information. So it's like, okay, now from now on, I will try to do it everywhere where they dig, because it's something that is really telling us a lot of what kind of food they had, because different parasites are coming from different type of animals. What was the hygiene? What was the way of cooking? Because some of them are just killed with a high temperature. So if you have some of them that are just surviving this, it means that they didn't have like they were not cooking their food. Or you have someone that's simply like coming from dogs, coming from, I don't know, fish. So you know what animals did they have a context with, or someone just coming from human facts. And so you know that the hygiene was really bad, and that it was mixing like drinking water with toilets or canalization. So all of this information is really important. And some of new ideas is like that I have is like, okay, we have so many cases, especially when there's young children that are dying. Like you don't know what they die of, because the in order to see a disease on a human skeleton, you need that person to be sick for a long time, and many times you don't have idea what happened, like because there is no any kind of traces, because maybe death arrives very quickly and there is nothing. So this is something that is really like, okay, maybe we should look to other things, like okay, sometimes you can get also DNA from diseases, but sometimes maybe we can find it just in surrounding kind of infections, parasitic infection that might have. So
Yeah, and that's, something else that varies from place to place is, parasites, like you said, are different in any kind of animal. And I imagine that differs from region to region also. Like we wouldn't have the same parasitic organisms here in the United States that you would have in, say, Spain or France or wherever your excavation might be.
Exactly. That's also like it has also this geographic component, and yeah.
So, if say a student wanted to get into bioarchaeology, what would you recommend for them?
Well, it's a bit complicated because it's depending from the country to country. So, in this way, for example, I studied archaeology and I came directly from archaeology to bioarchaeology. But in other places, in Spain, there would be mostly biologists that are actually start getting the career in bioarchaeology without any previous archaeological knowledge. So it's kind of weird. In some places you're coming from social anthropology, so it's kind of it's really big mix from the different specialization, but some people are coming from like medicine as well. So but whatever you take, like whatever path you take, you will need also to have this another part. So if for me as an archaeologist, sorry, this was my dog. For me as an archaeologist, I really suffered a lot with genetics, for example. That was the field that I knew nothing about, and it took me a long time to actually understand it. At the end, I bought the like biology books for like the primary school, and I had to like just to get the idea. And for the others that are like biologists, they might struggle to understand like what are actually the layers. How do we know how something is old? How do you excavate? And somebody's coming from cultural anthropology might have like more idea about the variety of sculptures, but then they have to study a lot of history. So it's really like it requires lot of effort. You have to learn the whole human body, diseases, but it's also good because you all the knowledge you have you can combine, and at the end, like it's a big mixture between like medicine and cultural anthropology and archaeology. So it's something that is really like you cannot stop learning about this. It's always you can always get more and more information. You can learn more about human body. We are like all this yeah, you can also come from genetics, so it's really something very exciting and very mixed from the different parts. But generally, you're not very few places has like the grad like grad studies of bioarchaeology. Normally, you start from some of those places that I mentioned, and then with the time, maybe you have some signature, maybe some have classes of that, and then you if you find it interesting, then you go more or less, like you have to find your way, usually trying to find supervisor that are doing this, and then slowly start to getting into it. Or some people are coming from archaeological context, they realize that they really like digging human remains, and they say like, yeah, but I would also like to know more about when I'm in the field. I want to understand better, to have more understanding of, I don't know, the composition process, putrefaction process, so to have better interpretation. So you can really come from different places and still get into that.
Well, Natasha, it has been really great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was really nice. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'll try to make this as least invasive as possible when I have someone on the show. Well, everybody, again, welcome to 2024 and stay tuned for more.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.